Hello everyone, and welcome to The Disciples' Defense, with your host, Sir Justin. This podcast will be dedicated to discovering life's toughest questions on faith, science, philosophy, and much more. And join him on this treacherous yet fulfilling conquest. Christ is King, and let the battle begin.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Justin, as that very attractive, low-voiced British man, who definitely wasn't me with a million effects, said in the intro. And this is the first podcast of The Disciples' Defense. Now, I am very excited to do this. I've been thinking about doing a podcast like this in the past, but I was procrastinating it a lot. I wasn't sure if I was ready for it spiritually. I didn't know if I was ready for it with any of the arguments that I had. And that's kind of the intro that I'm going to be giving. So for this first podcast, it's going to be more of an introduction into the ideas surrounding what this podcast is going to hopefully turn into. Now, would I love to do this full time? Of course. That would be awesome. I don't know if you guys have ever checked out the podcast called Unbelievable, but that man, Unbelievable, with Justin Brierley. There's a British man named Justin Brierley, and he does that. He releases a podcast. I think he's been doing it for 20 years, and he's very interesting. He's been having people on his podcast for well over 20 years now, or radio show back in the day, before there's podcasts, of all faiths, whether it be Muslims or even other denominations, like if there's Roman Catholics there. They get political as well. You've had Marxists on there. Obviously, they've been big names on there like John Lennox. There's been Nabil Qureshi, I believe Christopher Hitchens, people like that. Just open debate, open dialogue. And that's what I am going to hope to achieve with this podcast as well. So, for a brief introduction, the question that I'm sure some of you guys will be thinking is why? Why am I doing this? What's the point? What's the point of me, a 22-year-old dude, figuring out life? Why do I think I need to start a podcast? There are a million other podcasts out there. That's true, right? I mean, podcasts, I don't even know the numbers, how much exponentially it's grown, even in the past. I'm thinking the past 5 years, but even the past year alone, it seems like with the COVID shutting down everything, everyone's been driven to their basements, and it seems like everyone has a podcast now. Every YouTuber that's out there, every celebrity, they all seem to have a podcast now. Every single next door neighbor you have, there's a big chance that they probably have a podcast about something. So the specific topic of my podcast, apologetics, why did I choose this? Well, I think in order for me to answer that question, I'll have to share my testimony. So, but before I share my testimony, that'll be the last part of this podcast. I want to give a few thoughts about this podcast. Why am I doing this? So, this is basically why. I want to give knowledge to believers. I want to give new perspectives on Christian beliefs to non-believers as well. One of the great lines I love from one of my favorite apologists, Ravi Zacharias, is to make the thinker believe and the believer think. Now, what does that mean? I think that what that's saying is, for a lot of Christians that I know personally, and as well as I think this may be generally true, that a lot of us have that faith that we grew up with. A lot of us grew up in the church. But something that wasn't necessarily taught was defense of the faith. Something that was more taught was, worship is huge. Don't get me wrong. I love worship. I'm a worship leader, actually, in my church. So there's a huge spot for that, and we need that to worship God through not just music, but also through prayer, of course, and through the actions that we have in our lives and giving and stuff like that. But we're also supposed to make disciples. And we're supposed to evangelize. We're supposed to, if what we believe is true, if what we think we believe is true, wouldn't we want to tell as many people that as possible? I've noticed that from other religions. I'm not going to get too much into other religions today, but there are other faiths, mostly the polytheistic faiths. Hey, editing Justin here from the future. What I meant to say was polytheistic. I don't know what's wrong with my brain today. Anyways, carry on. As well as Judaism, where they don't necessarily believe in evangelizing, which I find silly because, in my opinion, if what you believe is true and you believe it is the best way for everyone to live as a functioning society, not only that, but it is the moral superiority. I can't say that word. Superiority? You know what I'm trying to say. The primary best morals to live by, if that's what it is, then wouldn't you want other people to also share in that glory? Not only that, but Christ's forgiveness. If what the Christians claim is true, that Christ truly does forgive us of our sins, and if there is a place such as heaven, wouldn't you want the people that you love to also join you there? I think that would be the ultimate showing that you love those people. Someone I can think of off the top of my head, Francis Chan. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of him. He's a pastor from the States. And something he said in one of the sermons I listened to once really stuck with me. He said when he became a Christian in high school, he would walk the hallways. And it was, I believe, was when he was first becoming a Christian. He would walk the halls when everyone was in the halls just packed with students. And he'd look at them all and say, I love you guys all. You guys are my friends. And you're all going to hell if you're not saved. I'm not going to be able to see you guys in heaven. And he could not stand that. He said that he went through his school yearbook and looked at every picture of every person in that yearbook and thought of them in the light of going to heaven or not. And that to me is, I mean, if that's not love, if that's not loving your fellow colleagues and your neighbors, I don't know what is. Now, I could be getting the story wrong, but I believe he was calling a lot of these people in his yearbook just to ask them how they're doing and to try to introduce them to Christ. Now, you don't have to go that extreme if you don't want. I know that takes a lot of guts to do that. So if you look at apologetics from the very beginning, what does apologetics even mean? Well, it comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to speak in return, defend oneself, to give an answer, along those lines. That's what it would use. And it was used in the context, usually at the beginning, was either in response to an accusation or a prosecution in the court of law. The defense of Socrates, as presented by Plato and Xenophon, was an apologia against charges of corrupting the young and not believing in the gods in whom the cities believed, but in other daemonia, or gods, that are novel, or leaders. Obviously, that's not my own words. I'm reading off that of Wikipedia. But that is basically the first use of the word. And then, of course, we see it through people like Justin the Martyr. Shout out to another Justin. We see it through Augustine of Hippo. And now I'm obviously not an expert on the history of apologetics itself. But from my perspective, the people that I see, the people that inspired me, people like Ravi Zacharias, Nabil Qureshi, David Wood, John Lennox, many. Oh, sorry, I even forgot. William Lane Craig is another one. And Lee Strobel, and many more. These guys are great. These guys dig into the reason. Like a guy like Lee Strobel. What was the crucifixion? Was this an actual historical event? Is there any backing for this? Is there any manuscripts that actually show us this happen? And this whole resurrection thing, like, the resurrection isn't true, then Christianity is false. And he dug into that, and I love his perspective. I love the perspective of John Lennox, coming from a guy who's got a very, very deep mathematics background. I believe he got his PhD in mathematics or something like that. I believe he got his degree in mathematics from Cambridge and Oxford in England. Very smart man. And he goes into the mathematics even behind the faith and the science behind it, of course, and behind creationism and the cosmological side of the faith, and the theological side. Man, these are hard words, man. Can we make these like easier words to say? The teleological, there it is, which is the argument of fine-tuning, the fine-tuning of the universe, and how it needs to have a designer behind it. many different arguments. Then there are people that go more into the moral arguments, or how accurate is Scripture, and is it to be interpreted in many different ways? How many of it is metaphor, and how much of it is to be taken literally? And is every single word in the Bible the true word of God? And these are all questions that are very great questions that a lot of these apologists would get into when I was younger, and I found it fascinating. So that's what I'm wanting to do. I'm wanting to help people grow in the faith. Now, I'm nowhere near the levels of those guys. I've just started getting back into reading. I read Why Suffering, a great book by Ravi Zacharias, and I read the testimony of Nabil Qureshi. I believe the book was called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, another amazing book, and his journey from Islam to Christianity and how that was for him. So I'm not going to claim to have the knowledge of those people, and something I also want you guys to know, which I believe is very important, is my views can definitely change. I am open-minded. I am not saying that I know the answers to everything. I definitely don't. The only person who does, of course, is God. And if I ever come across that way, I hope you guys understand that I might just be in the moment. I might be a little bit hyperbolic at times, but I definitely do not know all the answers. I'm not going to claim to. Now, I believe I've come to some pretty good conclusions on some difficult questions. And actually, that's a really other good part of this podcast that I'm wanting to do, is I just love learning. I love having intellectual conversations with people. Me and my friends do that all the time. We sit down and we talk about these really difficult, pressing questions and topics, whether it be about religion or politics. Like, a lot of this has a big part in our faith and in my life. And I don't fully understand people. I don't know if this is just a Canadian saying or if it's also a Western world American thing as well. But something I often hear is the two things you never want to talk about is politics and religion. And I find that fascinating because to me, those two things are some of the things that impact the world the most. And I think if a brief look at history can show that. So I think it's very important to be well-knowledged on these things. But I just love learning. So I think these kinds of conversations are needed, especially in this day and age. Seeing how rough 2020 has been for people. Depression's on the rise like crazy, skyrocketed like to an exponential amount. So has murder and depression and domestic abuse, just everything going on with COVID. It's just been horrible on the human psyche. So I think a podcast to hopefully bring some relief and some peace and some understanding, that's what I'm trying to get with this podcast. So I'm going to give you guys a brief testimony of my life, if you guys are at all interested. I hope so. So my life, I grew up a Christian. I grew up in a Christian home, lower middle class. I don't remember times where we didn't ever have food on the table. So my parents worked very hard, and we were able to live a moderately good life. And then when I was a young kid, we moved. So that was nice, and we got from an apartment to a relatively good-sized house, and that was great. I remember that area that we used to be in, it's just not a great area to live in, and it was good to move into this area where it was a lot more friendly, and people were neighborly and loving, and that really helped. I really enjoyed playing with kids around our area. So when it comes to the faith side of it, I grew up in the church. We went to church every single Sunday. We never missed a Sunday, and if we did, it's because we were going out of the city to see family or someone was sick. Like, we would always go to church, and we were always very involved. My mom's side of the family is very musical, so from a very early age, we were singing gospel songs, Southern gospel songs all the time, like constantly. Like, every home video I watch, we're singing gospel songs. Like, it was ingrained from a very early age, the faith. And we would read scripture all the time. There's a video of me, I believe I'm 2 or 3, and I'm trying, my dad was trying to teach me how to read the Bible, and I'm struggling along because I'm only 2 or 3, and I'm slowly spitting out the words to, I believe it's in Matthew, of the Mount of Transfiguration. Yeah, I'm not sure how well I did. I was mumbling halfway through it, but from a very early age, they ingrained us with these values and these beliefs of Christianity, and it had a very big impact on me. Elementary school, I will be honest, I don't believe it had as much, because at that age, it doesn't come up. You don't have debates in elementary school, and for the most part, if kids will surprise you. Like, they'll be friends with anyone from any walk of life. Doesn't matter at all. The kids are so loving and caring in that way. But for me personally, that changed when it came to middle school. The beliefs and how people approached me changed. It was quite different. The attitude towards people that seemed to be different. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't that different, but grade 7 looks around at grade 8. If you're a young kid in your preteen years, and you're like me, who I didn't play video games like the kids. I didn't play violent video games. I didn't swear at all, ever. I didn't engage in the same things that they did. I didn't hang out in the park and drink alcohol and Monster Energies and smoke weed with them. I don't know, it's an early age, but it was happening. Even at that age, I had friends having sex, and I spoke out against it, and I was looked at as weird. I was looked at as strange. And from that point of view, I don't remember having any other Christian friends. I grew up in public schools my whole life. So Christian friends I found difficult to come by at that age. When I was already shy, I didn't really want to speak out and try to find Christians. Although I was outspoken about my faith if you asked me about it. And I know a lot of people kind of knew me as that Christian guy. I don't remember ever asking other people that of themselves, which I'm not going to blame myself because this is in hindsight, but I always did notice that about me. But high school rolled around, and high school gave a completely different challenge. It was people actually questioning my faith, but it wasn't in a way that I was hoping for. I was hoping for an open discussion and honest questions, but it was more on the lines of bullying. And I can't say I suffered very much. I was never physically hurt for my faith. I can't claim that. But there were definitely times where I was made fun of quite a bit for my faith. Now, it might just be a slow jab here or there, and I can give an example off the top of my head, and it may sound silly to you, but not every day, but quite often, it really builds up. And I can think of one. I remember I was late to class, and they asked me if if I'd seen my nuns that day, and if I had seen the priest, and they were trying to make a joke about the priest and the sexually exploiting children to me. I just shook it off. I mean, I didn't think it was that funny of a joke. If it was funny, I might have laughed, but I didn't really see it that way. Then I remember other times where I came, it was raining outside, and they were all asking if I'd been baptized, or I don't know. I'm not going to remember much of examples. I tried to shake a lot of them off, and although that sounds very lighthearted, when you're young, it's not taken the same when it's constantly day in, day out, calling you the goody-goody Christian kid who can't do anything fun, and you never get to hang out the way that they get to hang out, and you don't get to play the same video games they do, and these little tedious things that really add up when you're a young guy, and you want to be like the other guys. So I remember when high school was done, just to go back to high school, I do distinctly remember the kid that I believe bullied me the most on my faith in high school. It was an automotive class, and I was getting ridiculed by him. And a lot of times I ignored it. Sometimes I'd say something back, but never anything crazy. And we were working on a car together. I forget what exactly the project. And he looked at me and said, "By the way, how exactly do you think that the earth was created? Like, what is the Christian perspective? I don't even know, man." And I was like, are you serious? Like, it just came as a complete shock to me. He's like, "Yeah, like, do you think the Big Bang happened? Like, what do you guys even think? I don't even know." And he kind of said it with a smirk. So it's almost like he was trying to play it off, but I could tell he was actually genuinely curious. And I had a really interesting conversation with him. And then, I believe a week later, he asked me another very interesting question. I don't remember right now. But I was so shocked that the guy that seemed to pick on me the most was asking me these questions. So I thought that was really cool. But here's the biggest turning point in my testimony. And this is where I'd say it was the peak of me coming to the real grips of my faith. although coming from a Christian perspective. I'd say I had the heart of a Christian, but I didn't have the head. I didn't know any reason why I should believe in it. So I remember at one point I had a job. I was working for World Vision, and I was going door to door with the most urgent cases of kids. And I would try to get people to sponsor the kids. I'm sure some of you guys have probably had those people at your door with World Vision. So we were up in Thompson, Manitoba, middle of nowhere, about 8 hours north of here. And I was sitting with my supervisor in the hotel, and we just finished watching a funny show. And he just sits at me, and he knew I was a Christian, and I knew he was an atheist. But I had played a lot of Christian rap for him in my car, and he loved it. He thought it was funny and cool. And he just looked at me and said, "Justin, why are you a Christian?" And I was kind of taken by that question because that's such a big question to ask somebody. So I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, why are you a Christian?" And then I definitely gave a subpar answer to that. Something along the lines of, well, I grew up in the church. I believe Jesus died for my sins. I feel God. I just know. I just know. And then he said, "Okay, well, that's interesting. But why specifically Christianity? Why aren't you a Jew? Why aren't you a Muslim? Why aren't you a Hindu? Why aren't you an atheist? Why Christianity specifically?" And I sat there, and I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to explain that to him. I didn't know how to explain any of my beliefs. And then that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat up all night thinking, why do I believe this? And I honestly felt ashamed. I felt like a disappointed God. I'm telling you my thoughts of how I felt at that moment. I felt like my only job. Like that could have been such a huge moment. That could have been a spark in that man's life. And I remember him to this day. That could have been a spark, and I missed that opportunity. So I look at that as a learning lesson, and I said, hold on, I need to know why. Because he actually was asking me questions that I had never even thought of. He was asking me questions about creationism, and he was asking me questions about specific verses and how I interpreted them. He was asking me very big questions on very big topics of Christianity. He was asking me the big questions that everyone asks, like, why is there bad things happening to good people? Why is there evil in this world? What's your beliefs on homosexuality? He was asking me these huge questions, and I had no idea where to go with it. And yeah, I just felt very disappointed in myself. So from that day on, I told myself I will find some form of answer to these. Now, whether or not that answer will fulfill their question and will it make them change their mind, that's not the question that is asked. Now, whether or not that the answer that I give is going to be satisfactory to them, or maybe is the answer that I give, if it's objectively true or not, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But I knew I had to find some form of answer. I had to start somewhere, and I could build from there. So I don't exactly know how I found Ravi Zacharias. I might have seen it on a YouTube, like a suggested clip on the side. I might have just searched a question in YouTube. I think that might have been it. Searched for a question on YouTube of God, and then I found his video. But any form or another, I found Ravi Zacharias, and he was the very first one that I was introduced to for finding these answers. And from a first perspective, I thought, man, he knows English for an Indian. I couldn't believe how well-knowledged he was. He was so literate. He's using these words like logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance, the coalescence of contrarieties. I'm like, whoa. I had to Google everything that was coming out of his mouth. But once I understood these words and these ideas that he was giving, man, I found really, really interesting stuff in what he was saying. I disagree with some things he says, but I thought, man, this is interesting. This is perspectives. These are things I've never thought of before. And then I ended up stumbling upon John Lennox. I believe Ravi and John were at a lecture together, and I found John Lennox, and he was giving more of the scientific reasons, like I was saying earlier. And then I found Nabil, and I found these other speakers. Now, here's the thing. This was the problem with me at the time. I was looking at these teachers, and I was looking at these apologists. And that's where I was only going to for these answers. And for this, a lot of the times, it did an okay job. But my problem was, I wasn't going to the word itself. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate that it's really easy to find a pastor online and click it and listen to the podcast when you're working. But it's not always easy to open that Bible and read it yourself. And I've used every excuse in the book to not read the Bible. I've said, oh, it's too late, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I can't sit down, I don't like reading. Every single excuse I could use, I would use it. I'd shake it off. Oh, I forgot, every single time I would use these excuses. But then I thought, hold on. If I am trying to find something that is going to be true to what God says, where else, how could I find if it was true or not if I didn't go to the word itself, which is claimed to be the truth? So I'd have to go to that original source, which is the Bible, and not go to these secondary sources, which are these people speaking about the Bible. And once I went back to the word, I couldn't believe it. Like the pieces of the puzzle finally filled in, and I could make this masterpiece of my heart that was longing for answers. And I'm sure a lot of young people can relate. I don't know if it's just young men or more often young men, or if it's young women more. I'm not sure the numbers. But I had that faith. I knew I had the Spirit in me. I knew that I had God, but I wanted to know why God. Why God? And that I was helped to be able to find through some of these speakers. Now, I remember there's many other big, huge influences in my life. Pastor Randy Levitt was a huge influence for me on my very early age. Just the passion he had for the Word and how he would dig into these very deep topics. And the perspective he gave was so refreshing, and I still love it to this day. Just the perspective he gives is so unique and so grounded in Scripture. And then I remember I was volunteering at another church called True Life Ministries, and I came across Pastor Dan, another man who I can sit down and talk with him about anything and everything. He's like another father to me. I look at him in that way, where he actually sat me down and told me he wanted to be my mentor. And I mean, that's what any young guy wants to hear. And we talked about very difficult questions that me and my friends were all going through. And he sat us down and had coffee with us. And I had that mentor. And I think that's so important for you guys out there listening, and girls. Find someone, I'd say generally of the same gender as you, that you can go to that's older and wiser, that can help guide you through these things. And anything, if you're going to take anything from this, please hear me here. Tell them the truth. Be honest with them. It's not easy. Trust me. I've had to say some very difficult things to these people that I look up to. Because the reason it's hard is because you don't want to let them down. You don't want them to look at you differently. But guess what? If they have the love of God, that's just going to make them want to reach out to you even more. It's going to make them love you. You'll love you even more because they realize the things you're going through. And they want to be there for you. And God wants that too. When you ask God and you tell God these things and you ask Him for forgiveness, it's the same thing. God's love is infinite. So yeah. Those people had the biggest impact on my life. And there is not one huge ground-shaking moment where I turned from not being a Christian and then turning into a strong believer. It's been a long journey of my whole life. I mean, I'm all of 22 years old. I'm not very old. But it was a very long process for me to understand what I was believing. And I'm not going to lie, guys. It's been a rocky battle. It has not been easy. I'm never going to claim that. I mean, I know certain Christians in my life where it's like, wow, you look at them and from the outside it looks like it's easy. That guy, he's such a strong Christian. But you don't know the battles he's facing. And I believe it's like that with me. A lot of people look at me and be like, oh, Justin, strong Christian, I know he's fine with his faith. No, I went through some very rough patches, very dark times for a lot of different places in my life that I won't get into today. But trust me, guys, when I say this, I've been through maybe some of what you guys have been through. I guarantee you guys have been through some things that are far worse than I have. But rock bottom isn't fun. And I know what it feels like. And I know what it feels like when it feels like there's nothing else there. And you're wondering why. Why did you make these decisions? And why did the things happen the way they happened? And I do believe that there are answers. I truly believe that it's through Christ. And I will be explaining that throughout this series. Yeah, so I mean, it hasn't been easy, but that's life, right? God never promised life to be easy. Actually, it's the opposite of that. And that's a very interesting topic that I'm definitely going to bring on with a guest, prosperity gospel. And there's nowhere that you can find that we're promised riches and wealth and health. It's just not there. But that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. I can't wait. I'm going to have a lot of guests on this program. I have a few in mind I'm going to contact very soon. We're going to hear from a couple, hopefully one or two different pastors I'm going to get on here. I'm going to get very wise people, older people than me, quite a bit older, some 2-3 times my age, hopefully. I'm going to get my brother maybe on very soon as well. He went to a Bible school. Doesn't mean that he's perfect either, trust me. But no, he gives very, very interesting perspectives. And I'm going to get as many perspectives on here as possible. I'm sure without a doubt I'm going to get one of my closest friends, William, on here. We think a lot alike, and we have lots of discussions. You're probably going to hear his name mentioned on here a few times. I'm going to have quite a bit of different people on here. It's going to be very interesting. I don't know how big this is going to get. I think there's a market for it. I think young people, I've heard Jordan Peterson say it, like young people are craving for meaning. And where are they getting their meaning? Jordan might disagree with me on this part. I truly believe it can only be found through Christ. But we're going to get very interesting opinions. I might get some atheists on here. I know a couple of atheists that I would be more than willing to have on this show. So yeah, if it gets big or not, it doesn't matter to me. This is what I love, and I'm sure a few guys out there would also enjoy hearing this as well. So yeah, that's my first podcast. So I'll hope you guys can tune in next week. Hopefully I can get this to be a weekly podcast. I might turn into bi-weekly depending on my schedule. Working full-time. Don't always have time for things like this, but I will do my best to make that happen. Not every battle can be won, guys, but we still know the King is on the throne. Bye-bye for now.